Why has Taiwan become one of the biggest geopolitical flashpoints in the world? For years, the Western mainstream narrative has been that China is an aggressive power waiting for the chance to invade Taiwan and trigger a major conflict. But is that really the full story? The reality is far more complicated than just saying one side wants war and the other wants peace. So let's hear what former Singapore Foreign Minister George Yeo has to say about why a war over Taiwan may not be as inevitable as many people think.
Okay, and what about the direct potential prospect of actual war with Taiwan? How, that's a topic that in Europe you don't often hear discussions about Southeast Asia, or almost at all, but if it comes up, this comes up. And people sort of take it almost as I wouldn't say for granted, in a sense that it will happen, but they take it for granted there's not that much deep discussion about it. So tell us, as a small country in Southeast Asia, Singapore, how do you look at the potential of another small country?
No, Kissinger has often said that in his negotiations with Zhou Enlai and with Mao Zedong, they always come back to Taiwan. So in the end, the breakthrough in relations was when the US recognized one China. It was fudged initially when Kissinger very cleverly came up with this phrase that Chinese on both sides of the straits recognize only one China. In 1979, when Carter established diplomatic relations with China, that one China is represented by Beijing. In fact, the idea of one China was first proclaimed in Cairo during the war, when Chiang Kai-shek attended together with Roosevelt and Churchill. And this was confirmed in Potsdam. So the legality of China's claim over Taiwan is internationally recognized. It's not in doubt. No one questions it. But America would, of course, want China to be divided forever if possible. But that's not going to happen because the correlation of forces is shifting. The Indo-Pacific Command, headquartered in Honolulu, they've done many exercises. In the Western Pacific, the US depends on the aircraft carriers for the projection of power. Today, Chinese hypersonic missiles, every one of those aircraft carriers are at risk. And Peter Hegseth, the defense secretary, before he became defense secretary, talked about it. So they had to be far away. But even Guam is within striking range. So the Americans will have to use cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. But China has many more of those missiles, or potentially can produce many more of those missiles.
Is it true that US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said China would win if a war broke out over Taiwan? George Yeo actually points to an interview where Hegseth bluntly admits that the Pentagon loses every single time in its own internal war games against China, warning that Chinese hypersonic missiles could take out all of US aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes. Take a look.
In the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What Hegseth is saying isn't just some wild theory. It's exactly how modern warfare has changed. For decades, the US used those massive aircraft carriers to project power around the world. But China didn't try to beat them at their own game. Instead, they built fast and effective hypersonic missiles specifically designed to sink those carriers from thousands of miles away. It completely flips the script on military power, which is why the old Western playbook just doesn't work in China's backyard anymore. Now, let's jump back into the clip and see what else George Yeo has to say.
A nuclear exchange is too dangerous because China has enough warheads to effectively destroy American cities. Furthermore, if there's war over Taiwan, TSMC will be destroyed. If TSMC is destroyed, America will be deprived of its chips, Europe will be deprived of its chips. But China can carry on, maybe at 70-80%, but China has quite a formidable chip-making capability, which is improving by the month. And China now has played its most important trump card, which is rare earths, to which the US has no response. Because without the magnets, you can't build F-35s, you can't have your bunker buster bombs. You have no defense industry. And the Chinese do not want to overplay that card, so they keep the US on the short leash, where they supply every 6 months with end-user certificates. The US keeps China on the short leash on chip technology. So each has leashed the other. So I don't think there'll be war over Taiwan.
Now, let's break this down. You see, for years, many Western media outlets have focused heavily on the possibility of China invading Taiwan. And it is true that tensions around the Taiwan Strait have increased in recent years. But one important question is often overlooked. Has China's basic position on Taiwan actually changed? The answer is, of course, no. China's claim over Taiwan is not something that suddenly appeared in recent years because of semiconductor or America's rivalry with Beijing. You see, this issue goes back decades. Since the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Beijing has consistently maintained that Taiwan is part of China and that eventual reunification is a national goal. And interestingly, this position is not only recognized by China. Most countries around the world, including the US, officially acknowledge the One China policy. When Washington established diplomatic relations with Beijing in 1979, it also recognized the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China. Of course, recognizing the One China policy does not mean every country agrees with Beijing's approach or how the issue should be resolved. But it does show that the Taiwan issue has always been a major diplomatic question, not something that suddenly appeared because of today's US-China competition. And this brings us to another important question. Is China really an unusually aggressive power compared with other major countries? This is where the debate becomes more complicated. If you look at overseas military activity, China's military footprint has been much smaller compared with the US. China has not launched large-scale overseas military campaigns in decades. Meanwhile, since 2001, the United States has been involved in numerous military operations around the world, particularly after the September 11 attacks. According to Brown University's Cost of War project, post-9/11 wars have cost the US trillions of dollars and involved military operations across dozens of countries. Now, this does not automatically mean one country is good and another is bad. International politics is rarely that simple. But it does challenge the idea that only one side has a history of using military power. When people discuss China's intentions toward Taiwan, another common argument is that Beijing only cares about Taiwan because of its semiconductor industry, especially companies like TSMC. And yes, Taiwan's semiconductor industry is extremely important. The world depends heavily on Taiwan for advanced chips. But historically speaking, this was not the original reason behind China's position. You see, China's desire for reunification with Taiwan goes back much further. In 1895, after losing the First Sino-Japanese War, China was forced to cede Taiwan to Japan. Then in 1949, after the Chinese Civil War, the nationalist government retreated to Taiwan. These events shaped China's modern national identity for generations. In other words, Beijing's Taiwan policy existed long before companies like TSMC were even created. TSMC was founded in 1987. China's claim over Taiwan go back almost a century before that. So from Beijing's perspective, Taiwan is not simply about controlling a valuable technology industry. It is deeply connected to history, sovereignty, and national identity. But then comes the biggest question. If Taiwan is so important, why hasn't a war happened? Well, according to Joshua, one major reason is that a conflict would be extremely difficult and costly for everyone involved. And this is where geography becomes incredibly important. If a war happened in the Taiwan Strait, China would be fighting right next to its own coastline. The United States, however, would have to operate thousands of miles away from home. That difference matters. China has spent decades developing what military analysts call an anti-access aerial denial strategy. The goal is simple. Make it extremely dangerous for an opponent to operate close to China's coast. This includes large numbers of missiles, submarines, aircraft, and other systems designed to threaten enemy forces approaching the region. For the US, one of the biggest challenges would be trying to project military power across the Pacific while protecting vulnerable supply lines. Meanwhile, China would be operating much closer to its own bases, ports, and manufacturing centers. This does not mean China would automatically win a conflict, but war is unpredictable, and modern conflicts involve many factors beyond weapons alone. But it does mean that any military confrontation over Taiwan would be far more complicated than most people imagine. There is also another factor that is often overlooked: industrial capacity. China has become the world's largest shipbuilding nation, with a massive commercial shipbuilding industry that gives it significant manufacturing capacity. In a long conflict, the ability to repair, replace, and produce equipment becomes extremely important. The United States still maintains some of the world's advanced military technology and has powerful alliances around the world. However, China has the advantage of geography and a huge industrial base operating close to the potential battlefield. This is why many analysts argue that a war over Taiwan would not be a simple victory for either side. The cost would be enormous. A conflict would disrupt global trade, damage the semiconductor industry, and create economic consequences far beyond Asia. In the end, the Taiwan issue is not just a military problem. It is a geopolitical competition between two major powers, each with its own interests, fears, and strategic calculations. China sees Taiwan as a historical and sovereignty issue. The US sees maintaining stability in the Taiwan Strait as important for regional security and its influence in Asia. And Taiwan itself has its own people, politics, and future to consider. That is why Jocho's argument is interesting. His point is not necessarily that tensions do not exist, because they clearly do. His point is that because the consequences of war would be so devastating, all sides have strong incentives to avoid crossing that line. The question is not simply who would win a war over Taiwan. The bigger question is this: would anyone truly win at all? So, what do you think? Do you believe a war over Taiwan is becoming more likely, or do you think the risks are too high for all sides to take that chance? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave your comments below. If you like what you watch, hit the like button, and more importantly, don't forget to subscribe to this channel to show your support. Thank you for watching.